we're talking about the compensation that survivors have to go through and what they have to go through in order to receive this compensation. Through the independent assessment process, commonly known as the IAP, all survivors, not all, who are eligible, only survivors who are eligible can receive this payment. And the payment ranges, I think, at the lowest, I think it's $20,000. Or is it $5,000? $5,000 and up until $275,000. And that's the max. So when you look at the front page of this, and if you can, the IAP wasn't for everybody. So anybody who, for the first one is probably going to be the lowest because it's also graded by points. And that's the thing, that the survivors were traumatized as children, but now when they have to go overhead and to explain this in order to get their compensation that they rightfully deserve, have to be traumatized again by living those memories and by repeating over and over again. And I've sat there and I've watched these survivors do this and go through this, My father went through this process. A lot of our families did. When they first rolled this out, they only expected maybe less than half. About 75% of the survivors nationally, I think, actually applied to this. And in my opinion, it was probably a lot more. The ones who didn't want to come out and say, that didn't want to have anything to do with this. And I had people in my family that chose not to go or not to go forward with this because they didn't want to remember this and go over this. So for the first part of this compensation rules, as they're called, of the IAP, it says on the bottom as the lowest points 5 to 25 points. Other wrongful acts on the first page, I think it says on the bottom, page 34. Being singled out for physical abuse by an adult employee or other adult lawfully on the premises, which was socially excessive in duration and frequency, and which caused psychological consequential harms at the H3 level or higher, and we'll go into the harm levels in a bit. When you go further up, there's the SL1, or the sexual abuse level 1. So they categorized the sexual abuse. One or more incidents of fondling or kissing, nude photographies or photographs, taken of the claimant. The act of an adult employee or other adult lawfully on the premises exposing themselves. Any touching of a student, including touching with an object by an adult employee. That's 5 to 10 points. So if a survivor sitting there, and it's more than likely a lot worse than that. There's times where you get to SL5, which is the top of the list, and which the most points. Sexual abuse level 5. Repeated, persistent incidents of anal or vaginal intercourse. Repeated, persistent incidents of anal or vaginal penetration. Now you're sitting there thinking with an elder who is in their 60s, 70s, sometimes in their 80s, talking about stuff like this and how embarrassing that is to them. But also to relive that again. Wow. Wow. And you sit there and as a person, as a support person, and they do this. They've gone through all this. They've gone when they were children, and now to relive it again in their minds. Wow. And this is what they had to do and go through in order to get that fair, I wouldn't say a fair, but a compensation. There's a number, there's a magic number to this. And when they say consistent, 5 is the magic number that they had to reach. So if it happened 4 times, and who the heck was counting? If it happened 4 times, well, you're going to get less than maybe if it happened 5 or 6 times. Maybe it happened 20 or 30 times, 100 times. It's still going to be the same amount of money, but it happened far more often. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what the Indian residential school survivors went through. On the second page, it says the consequential harm. And again, in the end, you're adding up the points. You're always adding up the points. I'll just throw this out, a harm, they'll call it, a level of harm. I'll throw out number 3. And again, this is the Indian residential schools independent assessment process. You can Google it and you can find it online. Let's go number 4. Harm resulting in some dysfunction. And again, that's 16 to 19 points added to the score. Frequent difficulties with interpersonal relationships, development of obsessive compulsive and panic states, severe anxiety, occasional suicidal tendencies, permanent significantly disabled physical injury, overwhelming guilt, self-blame, lack of trust in others, PTSD, and some sexual dysfunction or eating disorders. Now, again, the elders who are going through this, for one, English language is, well, for people in Eskasoni anyways, the English language is, the comprehension of English language is 0 to 0. Very, very hard for some people to understand these which means our people will say, oh, these guys speak really, really high. They speak like a really difficult to understand. When a lot of the elders are like that, they can't comprehend English. And when you're going here with the lingo of lawyers and judges, they have to listen to this, and they have to themselves explain to the back up a little bit. They're in a room with what they call an adjudicator, which is a lawyer, or the judge, basically making the amount of how much they're going to receive, or the decision on that. And then there's their lawyer if they're represented by a lawyer, and then usually one of the support people. Oh, and there's also I forgot the government lawyer who's there with them. Canada's lawyer. Canada has to have representation there. So that's what the settlement agreement came in 2005 came down. This was a part of that settlement agreement in order for survivors, Indian residential school survivors nationally, to get compensated. So in order to get compensated, you had to reveal everything, every nook and cranny, every detail. I've heard some adjudicators ask, what did it smell like? How did it feel? How do you know it happened? Was it a finger? If this itself, if that is not traumatic, or even that re-traumatizing as the actual event that happened many, many, many years ago for these survivors, and the strength and the resiliency that these survivors had to go through this bullshit, to go through this, and to actually come out whole and be as a person. And my hat's off to survivors all over Canada that went through this process, and to come out and continue being who they are. The burden of this is just, I can't even comprehend it. When you're going through the IAP, they have the thing called aggravating factors. And when the abuse was happening, if there was a verbal abuse, racism, threats, intimidation, sexual abuse accompanied by violence, And for further and so forth, is they would bump the points up. They would bump it by add 5 to 15% to your balance of points. They also had consequential loss of opportunity. And Clark mentioned a lot about drinking and drug abuse. Why? Because they're trying to forget. That's not an easy one, but just for simplicity's sake, they're trying to forget what happened to them. So most of the time, they're drunk or they're on drugs, they were high, and they couldn't keep a job. They get fired. There's also another a little bit more difficult. So if you're losing a job, so they'd have to do some math, and they figure out how much money they lost. So they could be compensated so much money for losing their job, in the 1960s. So on the last page here, page 37 you have the compensation points. And when I mentioned the higher the points, the more money. And after you've sat there, you watch an elder cry and sob, going over the worst part of their lives, why they're in this such predicament, and to be given in my opinion, on average, between $100,000 and $125,000 on average, I've noticed, for being raped, molested. You guys get the idea. So these survivors are so resilient. You have Clark up here talking about what he's done for our community, and not just Eskasoni, but for all Mi'kmaq people. With his experience and how I've seen the poor guy. It's funny, I'm picking on Clark, but sometimes somebody gives him a call, 9 o'clock at night, we'll say. Hey Clark, I'm feeling down in the dumps. I need something. Clark will sit there at 9 o'clock at night, fire up the sweat. He's done 3 or 4 in the morning. He's done that. And that's why I always say Clark is such an amazing person when it comes to this. And I forgot where I lost my train of thought where I was going to this, so it's kind of heavy. Even I get really worked up sometimes.